Loyalty is the kind of thing you don't notice until it's missing, and by then it's too late to put it back. I learned that in Columbus, standing on Maple Ridge Road with my permit folder under my arm, thinking about a single signature I'd watched dry on a courthouse stamp. I'm not a dangerous man because I can get loud. I'm dangerous because I can wait, and I can keep records. I'm Robert Calloway. I'm 64, and I've been making the same black coffee at 5:15. Every morning for so long my body wakes up before my alarm. I drink it standing at the kitchen window, looking out like there's something out there I'm supposed to notice. Late November makes the glass cold under your knuckles. And I'll tell you now, before I tell you anything else, the payoff wasn't a fight. It was a letter. Certified. It landed on a doormat like it weighed 100 pounds. And it only mattered because of one thing I did quietly weeks earlier. I didn't understand what that meant yet. Harlow's Diner still smells like bacon grease and old coffee no matter what year it is. Meridian Valley. Hospital has those bright hallways that make you feel like you're always in the way. And Franklin County Courthouse, if you've never been, has floors that look clean but still carry the scuffs of every person who ever walked in thinking they were in control. That detail matters later. 7:42 a.m. Wednesday, January 14th. I'm putting that there on purpose because people always ask when things changed, like it was one big moment. For me, it was a string of small ones you only see when you look backward. That morning, I was on Maple Ridge Road early, the way I always am. There's a certain light you get in winter in Ohio where everything looks honest. Hard edges, no haze. You can see the nails on a subfloor from 20 feet away. I had my permit folder in the passenger seat. The one with tabs, electrical, plumbing, structural. It makes me feel calm, having it in order, like I'm doing right by the people who live in the houses I work on. I still pull permits even though I'm semi-retired. Some guys my age buy a boat and disappear. I kept my truck, kept my boots, kept walking job sites every morning. It's not because I need the money. It's because routine is the last thing that lies to you, and because Claire needed me. My daughter was recovering from surgery back then, serious enough that she moved slower, talked softer, and leaned her shoulder into the hallway wall when she thought nobody was looking. She was living in the house on Maple Ridge Road with her husband, Marcus, and their 2 kids. That house is a big part of why this story ended the way it did. Claire didn't make speeches. She didn't cry on my shoulder. She did small things, the kind that get missed by people who only notice loud love. Sometimes when I'd come in early, I'd find a folded paper towel under my coffee mug at the counter. In ballpoint pen, in her handwriting that always slants a little to the right, it would say, "Thank you, Dad," no period, like she didn't want to take up too much space. And she did this other thing that still makes my throat tight when I think about it. She'd quietly move my work boots from the doorway to the side, so I wouldn't trip in the dark when I came in at odd hours, half awake, carrying lumber catalogs and permit papers. That was Claire. She loved without asking for attention. I wish I could tell you I saw everything coming. I didn't. Marcus was easy to like at first. He had that thing where he could talk to anybody. He'd walk into Harlow's Diner and the waitress would already be pouring his coffee. He coached his son's little league team and actually showed up. He was a good father. I'll give him that. He loved those kids for real. But there were red flags, 3 of them, clear as day, and I did what dads do when they want their daughter's life to be simple. I explained them away. First red flag was small. It was how he talked about money like it was a game he was winning. Not in a proud way. More like he couldn't help himself. He'd say things like, "I'm going to leverage this," about normal household stuff, like refinancing or a credit card. Second red flag was the way he handled gratitude. If I paid for something or fixed something, or drove Claire to a follow-up appointment when he had a meeting, he'd nod like it was expected. Not rude, just automatic, like my help was part of the furniture. Third red flag was his eyes when he thought nobody was looking. You know what I mean. That quick scan, like he's measuring a room for what it can give him. I told myself he was young, ambitious. That's what you call it when you're trying to be fair. And I was trying to be fair. My mornings looked the same back then. Coffee at 5:15, stand at the kitchen window. watch the streetlights fade. Then I'd drive out to whatever job site was active. Walk it slow, check the framing, check the schedule, talk to the guys. I didn't quit being a contractor when I got older. I just got more careful. Every nail, every permit, every receipt. Because I've seen what happens when you trust people to remember what you did for them. On the days Claire had appointments at Meridian Valley Hospital, I'd swing by Maple Ridge Road after my first site walk. I'd bring groceries. Nothing fancy. Soup, crackers, the kind of soft bread you can eat when your stomach doesn't want to fight. I never announced myself. I'd knock, let myself in when she called out. Marcus was usually on a call. He'd be sitting at the kitchen, island with a laptop open, one earbud in, fingers tapping, looking busy. It's a special skill, looking busy. He didn't even look up. Claire would be on the couch with a blanket pulled up to her waist, healing in that quiet way people do when they're tired of being sick. I'd set the bags down. I'd wash my hands. I'd ask her, pain level today, like I was her nurse. I'd make the soup. I'd check her meds, not in a controlling way, just in a dad way. And she'd watch me, and then later, when I'd go to pick up my mug, there would be that folded paper towel waiting. That part mattered. It wasn't just sweetness. It was proof she saw me. Another micro thing that I didn't understand until later was Marcus started asking questions that didn't match his tone. Not, how's Claire doing? That was for show. It was things like, so the mortgage on this place is, what, pretty low? Right, and who's actually on the deed again? And you still got that. Contractor license, sponsorship, paperwork. Under your name, yeah. He'd ask it casually, like he was asking about weather. And I'd answer casually, because if you've been building houses your whole life, you're used to talking in facts. You don't hide from a tape measure. I didn't understand what that meant yet. One afternoon I was at Franklin County Courthouse, pulling a permit for a small remodel job. Nothing big. Replacing a load-bearing beam on a split level for a couple that reminded me of my parents. I remember standing at the counter, the clerk sliding papers back and forth like she was dealing cards. I remember her stamp. Thunk, thunk, thunk. And I remember seeing a guy 2 people over getting yelled at quietly by a woman in a suit. Not loud, just tight. The kind of legal tension you can taste. It stayed in my head, that quiet kind of chaos. Because my life was quiet chaos too, just slower. Claire's surgery had gone well, technically. That's what the doctor said. But recovery is where people find out who they married. Marcus took the kids to school. He packed lunches. He did the outward stuff. But he also started acting like Claire's. Recovery was an inconvenience, with a timetable. He'd glance at the clock when she moved too slow. He'd sigh when a prescription needed refilling. He'd talk about getting back to normal, like normal was a product he ordered and didn't receive. I'd sit at the kitchen table with my coffee, paperwork spread out, and I'd hear him say things like, "We can't keep running this like a charity." Charity. He'd say it while my daughter was still, walking with that careful short step people walk with when it hurts to exist. I didn't say anything. Not because I agreed, because I was measuring. That's what I do. I measure the span before I cut the board. And I was watching for what kind of man Marcus was going to be when nobody clapped. There was another odd detail, a micro-mystery that felt like nothing at the time. Marcus started having his mail sent to a P.O. box. I noticed because once his name didn't show up in the stack at the door, then again, then it was consistent. When I asked him, he said, "Just keeping things organized." Organized is what people say when they don't want you to know. I wish I could tell you I acted then. I didn't, because Claire was still vulnerable, financially dependent, medically tired, and I didn't want to be the dad who blows up her world while she's already trying to hold her body together. So I kept doing my habit, coffee at 5:15, kitchen window, quiet, and I kept showing up. Dennis, my older brother, lived about 20 minutes away. He's the kind of man who answers the phone on the second ring, and you can hear his boots on the floor before you finish your sentence. He'd come by sometimes just to drop something off, a bag of oranges, a new flashlight, a set of gloves for my truck, He didn't ask a lot of questions. He'd look at Claire, look at Marcus, look at me. And then later, when we were outside by my truck, he'd say one line like, "You doing all right?" Not a therapy session, just a check-in. And I'd say, "Yeah, that's how men in our family survive. We don't dramatize. We inventory." Still, the pressure in that house was building. You could feel it in the way Marcus shut cabinet doors a little too precisely, the way he corrected the kids for small things, the way Claire stopped asking for help and started apologizing for needing it. A woman should never apologize for healing. There was a night in late November where I stayed later than usual. Claire had a rough day. Nausea, pain, just the mess of recovery. Marcus said he was going to run out. Didn't say where. Just grabbed his keys, checked his phone, and walked out. The door closed gently. That should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It felt like a decision being made. Claire watched the door for a second, then looked down at her hands like she could fold herself smaller. I made tea. I put it in the mug she liked. I didn't ask what she was thinking. I just sat nearby and watched a cooking show with the volume low because noise hurt her head. That night when I left, I stepped over my boots that had been moved neatly out of the way. I paused. I didn't know why I paused. I just did. That detail matters later. The next morning, Marcus texted me. Not Claire, me. "Can you meet me at Harlow's? Need to talk." I stared at my phone for a while. The message was polite. It even had a period. Polite can be sharp. I told Claire I had a meeting. She nodded. She didn't ask. I think she already knew what kind of meeting it was going to be. And that's the thing about daughters. They know the weather in their own home. At Harlow's Diner, Marcus chose a corner booth. The same one he always liked, because you can see the door, and you can see the counter, and you can see who comes in. Control has a preferred seat. He was already there when I walked in. Coffee in front of him. He'd taken 2 creamers, stirred them, and lined the empty cups beside the saucer like he was setting up a small fence. That was another micro thing. The little fence. I slid into the booth opposite him. I ordered black coffee because that's what I do. I don't sweeten hard moments. He talked for a while about nothing. Kids' schedule. A friend's promotion. Some sports talk. A story about a guy at work who didn't know what he was doing. He said it all with a calm face. I waited. I didn't understand what that meant yet. But I knew waiting was the only power I had in that booth. Finally, he leaned back and looked at me like I was one more task. "Robert," he said, "we need to set some boundaries." There it was. The language people use when they want to push you out without saying the real reason. He said Claire needed space. He said she needed to focus on her marriage. He said it was too many cooks. Too many cooks? Like I was seasoning ruining his meal. Then he said the line. Calm, even, no raising his voice, no shaking. "You're not needed here anymore, old man." He didn't even look up. Not at my face. Not at my hands. Like he'd rehearsed it and didn't want to see the effect. For a second, I felt my chest tighten. Not anger. Something else. Like a quiet door closing inside you. I took a breath. My coffee came. The waitress set it down, glanced at our faces, and walked away. She knows when not to get involved. I looked at Marcus. I thought about Claire at home with her incision still tender, moving my boots so I wouldn't trip. And I said the only thing that kept me from saying something I couldn't take back. "All right, one word can be a whole life." He nodded like a manager who got what he wanted. He started talking again, already moving on, already planning the version of the story. He'd tell later where he was the reasonable one. I watched him stir his coffee again even though it was already mixed. His hands were steady. His nails were clean. He looked like a man who believed he was untouchable. If you've ever been pushed out of a place you helped build, tell me in the comments what you did with that silence. I paid for my coffee. I didn't need him to. I left a tip. Not because I felt generous. Because I don't punish working people for my personal mess. When I stood up, Marcus slid out of the booth first, like he was making room for me to leave. He didn't say goodbye like a family member. He said it like a receptionist. "Drive safe." The door closed gently behind me when I left Harlow's, and in that moment, I understood something I didn't want to understand. The story wasn't about feelings. It was about access. I drove back to my house, the one I'd lived in for decades. I made another cup of coffee, even though it was late morning, because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I stared at the sink. Then I opened my file cabinet. I keep a file cabinet because I'm a contractor, and contractors learn that if you don't have it in writing, you don't have it. Permits, lien waivers, paid invoices, insurance certificates, sponsor forms, and something else, the deed. I had been careful with the Maple Ridge Road house. Years ago, when Claire and Marcus first got married, they were young and excited and broke in the normal way. Marcus had a job that looked stable, but his credit was thin. Claire was working part-time and going back to school. I'd bought that house as a way to give them a start. I didn't announce it as charity. I framed it like an investment. I told myself I'd transfer it later. Later came and went. Then the kids came, then life, and the deed never moved. It was still in my name. I hadn't thought about it in a long time because I didn't want to think of my daughter's home as leverage. It felt wrong. But sitting there in my quiet kitchen, hearing Marcus's calm voice in my head calling me old man, I realized something simple. Marcus wasn't asking for boundaries because he wanted peace. He was asking because he wanted control without witnesses. I waited. Then I did the first procedural thing. Not angry, not rushed, just scheduled. I called one person, my brother Dennis. He answered on the second ring. I said, "You got a minute?" He said, "Tell me where. I'll be there." That was it. Under 5 seconds. No questions yet. I told him my place. 10 minutes. When he arrived, he didn't bring advice. He brought presents. He sat at my kitchen table, hands folded, eyes on the file cabinet like he knew exactly what kind of day it was. I slid the deed across the table. He read it slowly. He didn't whistle. He didn't react big. He just said, "Still yours." "Yeah," I said. He nodded once. "Then you got options." That word. Options. It was the first thing that felt like air. I told him what Marcus said. Dennis's face tightened for half a second. Then it relaxed. He has that kind of control. Anger comes and goes through him like a wind you don't see. He said, "What do you want?" I didn't answer right away, because what I wanted wasn't revenge. It wasn't to hurt Marcus. What I wanted was to make sure Claire and the kids were safe, even if Marcus decided they were inconvenient. I wanted something steady. I wanted protection that didn't require anyone to be noble. I said I wanted in writing. Dennis nodded again. Then he stood up and walked to my counter and started rinsing his coffee mug like he always does, like we were just two men after breakfast. That's one of those warmth-contrast moments I'll never forget. Marcus used language like a blade at Harlow's, and Dennis washed a mug like family was a given. I started making calls the next day, but not to Marcus, not to Claire, not even to friends. I called an estate attorney. Her name was Patricia Odoms. Her office was quiet, and it smelled faintly like paper and lemon cleaner. She had a way of speaking that made you feel like you could breathe. When I explained the situation, she didn't gasp. She didn't shame me for being late to my own protection. She asked questions, calm ones. "Is the deed in your name solely?" "Yes." "Are there any recorded liens?" "No." "Do they pay you rent?" "No." "Do you want to evict?" I paused. "No, not unless I have to." She nodded like that was reasonable. Then she said, "We can protect the asset without drama. A revocable living trust would allow you to control what happens next. You can set terms. You can name beneficiaries. You can name a successor trustee. You can make it very hard for anyone to force your hand." That sentence was my first real re-hook inside my own life. Hard for anyone to force your hand. I didn't understand all of it yet, but I knew this was the kind of work I could do. Forms, filings, not feelings. Patricia asked me to bring documents. The deed, tax statements, insurance info, any notes about any co-signed loans. When I got home, I pulled out everything. I found more than I expected. Here's one of the micro-mysteries that paid off later. In my folder, I found a copy of a business loan packet I'd signed as a co-signer for Marcus 2 years earlier. I'd forgotten the specifics because it was filed under family, not work. The amount was $38,000. There it was in black ink, my name under his, my credit backing his ambition. I stared at it for a long time, not because I was mad, because I was embarrassed. A man hates realizing he helped build the cage he's now locked out of. I waited. Then I made a list. Literally. Yellow legal pad. 1. Protect the house. 2. Protect Claire's medical decision-making if something happens again. 3. Separate my business exposure from Marcus's. 4. Keep the kids stable. There's a certain peace in a list. Patricia moved quickly but not rushed. She drafted a revocable living trust. We named it the Calloway Family Trust. Simple. Not cute. Not vindictive. We transferred the Maple Ridge Road property into the trust. Not to me personally. To the entity. That matters. She explained that the trust could outline who gets to live there, under what conditions, and what happens if someone tries to sell or borrow against it. Then we added something else. A memorandum of understanding about occupancy. Patricia called it a use agreement that essentially said, Claire and the children could reside there. Marcus could reside there as long as he remained married to Claire and did not attempt to encumber the property. Encumber. That's a lawyer word that means mess with it. It was clean. It was quiet. It wasn't emotional. Meanwhile, I kept my routine. I still went to job sites. I still walked them every morning. I still pulled permits at Franklin County Courthouse when needed. I still showed up at Maple Ridge Road when Claire texted me directly. Marcus didn't stop me at the door. He just stopped acknowledging me. He'd sit at the island. Laptop open, earbud in. He didn't even look up. Claire would meet my eyes with that apology people give when they're trapped. Between two men and neither one is allowed to be fully human. I never made her choose. That's important. If you love someone who is vulnerable, you don't make them perform loyalty. You make it easy for them to breathe. I'd bring groceries. I'd check her meds. I'd fix a loose stair tread. I'd adjust the thermostat because she was cold all the time after surgery. I didn't mention Harlow's Diner again. Marcus thought I was fading away. That was his false assumption. He thought humiliation makes older men disappear. He thought I'd retreat into my own life and accept being reduced. The paperwork was already moving. And there were other odd little details. Marcus started asking. Claire questions about me that she'd repeat without meaning to. He wanted to know if you still had your contractor license, sponsorship tied to his application. She said once, eyes down. My hand froze on the soup ladle for half a second. That mattered later. Another day. I saw a folded envelope on their counter with a return address from a lender. Marcus snatched it up quickly and slid it into his backpack. He smiled at the kids like nothing was happening. I said nothing. I waited. Patricia advised me to separate my business from Marcus's exposure. See, Marcus had been using my contractor license, sponsorship in a way that kept some doors open for him. It wasn't illegal. It was just convenient for him. We filed the necessary notices to terminate sponsorship and update the relevant registrations. That part was procedural. No accusations. Just forms and timelines. It was the kind of thing that doesn't feel like revenge. It feels like cleaning up a job site so nobody gets hurt. Then Patricia said something that made my stomach drop in a calm way. Robert, if Claire is medically vulnerable, has she executed any healthcare power of attorney? I stared at her, because I knew the answer. No. Claire trusted Marcus to handle everything. Because that's what wives do when they still believe marriage automatically means safety. Patricia slid a document across her desk. Healthcare power of attorney. Another one, living will declaration. This is protection, she said. Not punishment. You can encourage her to name someone she trusts. It could be Marcus. It could be you. It could be your brother. But it should be deliberate. When I drove home, I kept both hands on the wheel like I was carrying something fragile. That night was the grief moment, the one that wasn't rage. Just sadness that settles on you after everyone else sleeps. I sat in my kitchen alone with one lamp on. The house was quiet in that way that makes you hear the refrigerator hum. I stared at the folded paper towel from Claire that I'd slipped into my coat pocket weeks earlier. "Thank you, Dad." I didn't cry loud. I didn't punch anything. I just felt the weight of loving someone who might not be protected by the person closest to them. I waited. I took a breath. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed, but not fancy. Just one line. "Please let me do this right." The next days were administrative. Calls, appointments, paperwork. I also did something else, quietly. I asked Dennis to be the successor trustee in the trust documents. Not because I didn't trust myself, because if something happened to me, I wanted the trust to be managed by someone who doesn't get dazzled by charm. Dennis didn't ask for a thank you. He just said, "Okay." Another warmth contrast punch hit me around then. Marcus wouldn't look up when I walked in, and Dennis was out in my driveway on a Saturday morning, checking my tire pressure without saying a word. That's family. It's not speeches. It's air in the tires. Now, in the middle of all this, Claire's recovery took a turn. Not a medical emergency, but a scare. A fever, a bad night. One of those nights where the body reminds you it's still in charge. Marcus took her to Meridian Valley Hospital, and I followed in my own truck, staying back, not crowding. At the hospital, Marcus moved fast, but not tender. Efficient. He knew the terms. He'd learned the language of care without learning the heart of it. When a nurse asked who to call for updates, Marcus said, "I'm her husband." Like that ended the conversation. I watched Claire's eyes drift toward me for a second. Just a second. She looked tired, small. That detail matters later. In the waiting area, Marcus paced, checked his phone, typed messages, took 2 calls. I looked at the clock because I always look at the clock in places like that. At 11:16 p.m., he stepped outside to take another call. I sat alone in that waiting room, listening to the quiet buzz of vending machines, and I realized something. Marcus wasn't afraid of Claire being sick. He was afraid of Claire being dependent. That's different. And when he came back in, he smiled at me like we were on the same team, like we were both just handling a situation. He said, "We're good. They're running labs. You can head home." It wasn't a request. It was a dismissal. And I did something that surprised him. I stood up. I nodded. I said, "Okay." Then I sat back down. Not because I wanted to challenge him. Because I wasn't going to leave my daughter in a hospital without someone who loved her without conditions. Marcus looked at me for a moment. He didn't push it. He sat down across from me, far enough to feel separate. For the first time in weeks, he looked tired in a real way. The mask slipped. He rubbed his eyes. He stared at the floor. And he said something human, not cruel, not manipulative, just honest. "I'm scared," he said. "I can't lose her." There it was, his redeeming trait, showing up like a small light in a dark hallway. He loved his kids, yes, but he also loved Claire in his own way. Maybe not the way she deserved. But it wasn't nothing. I didn't comfort him with big words. I just said, "She's strong." He nodded. He swallowed. He looked like a man trying not to fall apart in public. That human moment mattered to me. It kept me from making him a cartoon villain in my head. It reminded me that consequences can land on a person who still has a heart in there somewhere. And still, a heart doesn't undo harm. Claire was discharged the next afternoon. Marcus drove her home. I followed again, quiet. At their house, I helped Claire up the steps. I fixed the loose rail because it wobbled and I didn't trust it with her weight. Marcus watched me do it. For a second, he looked like he wanted to say thank you. Then his phone buzzed and his face turned back into work. The paperwork was already moving. Welcome to the Dad Chronicles. Get comfortable and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to love it here. Patricia called me 2 days later. "Robert," she said, "the trust is drafted. We can execute it and record the deed transfer into the trust this week." Execute. Record. Those words sound harsh, but they're just mechanics. She scheduled me for Friday at 9:30 a.m. to sign. She said to bring my ID, and she'd have a notary present. I wrote it down on my calendar like it was a dentist appointment. On Thursday, Marcus texted me again. Just one line. Need you to co-sign a renewal, quick. That was it, no please. No context. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. A micro-mystery clicked into place. The P.O. box, the lender envelopes, the questions about my license sponsorship, the sudden need for a renewal. He was planning something. Probably refinancing, probably expanding his business, probably using the house he thought was his as collateral, or using my name like a tool. And he believed I'd be too embarrassed to say no after being called old man at Harlow's. I didn't respond right away. I waited. Then I wrote back, busy this week. That's it. He replied with a thumbs up, like I was a coworker. Claire texted me later that night. Dad, you okay? Marcus said you've been distant. I looked at that message for a long time. What do you tell your daughter when the truth might break? Her while she's still healing. So I wrote, I'm okay, rest, love you. She sent back a heart. Another folded paper towel showed up under my mug when I stopped by the next morning. Thank you, Dad. I put it in my coat pocket like it was a medal I didn't deserve. Friday at 9:30 a.m., I sat in Patricia's office. She laid the documents out in neat stacks. The notary checked my ID, watched me sign. My hand was steady. My stomach wasn't, because I knew, in a quiet way, that I was changing the terrain under Marcus's feet. He just didn't know it yet. We recorded the deed transfer of the Maple Ridge Road. House into the Calloway family. Trust. Patricia filed it properly. With the county. She made copies, labeled folders, and told me where to keep them. This does not take the home away from Claire, she said. It protects her. It protects the children. It gives you a framework if something goes wrong. What if Marcus finds out? I asked. He will, she said, and her voice was gentle. But he will find out through the proper channels. Not through a fight, and by then it will be done. That sentence sat in my chest like a stone. By then it will be done. The next week was a slow burn. I kept my routine. Job sites, permits, coffee at 5:15, window. Marcus kept acting like nothing changed. He still didn't look up when I walked in. He still spoke to me like an optional service. Claire got a little stronger. She started moving around more. She started folding laundry, slowly, on the couch. She started making the kids snacks again. And that's when Marcus began pressing. He said things in front of Claire like, we should consider pulling some equity for renovations. And we could consolidate debt if we refinance. He said, we. But his eyes were on his phone, on numbers, on his own vision of the future. Claire would glance at me and I'd give her a small nod. Like, I'm here, no panic. I was careful not to poison her mind. I wasn't going to turn my daughter into a battlefield. Still, I started doing one more procedural thing. Patricia recommended it, and I agreed. We prepared a medical power of attorney for Claire. We didn't force it. We simply offered it as a safety step after her scare. When I brought it up, I did it gently. I said, Claire, I don't want to scare you. But, after Meridian Valley, I think it's smart you put something in writing. Who you want making decisions if you can't. She looked at me like she was trying not to cry. Not dramatic tears. Just that shine. She said, Dad, I don't want to hurt Marcus. I said, this isn't about hurting him. It's about making sure nobody guesses. She nodded slowly. She asked for time. I gave her time. Because pressure doesn't heal anyone. Then came the moment where Marcus walked into the trap he set, still believing he was the one holding the strings. On a Tuesday morning, he called Claire into the kitchen. I was there fixing a cabinet hinge. He had papers spread out like a salesman. He was calm, confident. Babe, he said, I scheduled a meeting with the lender. Just to get options. No big deal. Claire looked at the papers. She looked tired. He said, we just need your signature and your dad's since he helped before. There it was. The plan. Use my name. Use her vulnerability. Call it options. He looked at me finally. For a second. Robert, you'll do this, right? Just like last time. His tone was light, like he was asking me to pass the salt. I wiped my hands on a rag. I kept my voice even. I'm not signing anything, I said. He blinked. Why? Because, I said, I'm not. No argument, no explanation, not yet. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he smiled, that controlled smile people use when they're filing something away. "Okay," he said. "We'll handle it." And he gathered the papers like he was the adult in the room. I watched him do it. I watched the kids run through the hallway behind him, laughing, unaware. I wish I could tell you that was satisfying. It wasn't. It felt like standing on a bridge and hearing the first crack. Later that afternoon, Patricia called me. "Robert," she said, "we received an inquiry. A lender requested verification of ownership and authority regarding Maple Ridge Road. They're attempting to proceed with a refinance." Of course they were. I said, "What happens now?" Patricia said, "Now they get told the truth." I waited. "What does that look like?" I asked. "It looks like a certified letter," she said. There it was, the letter I teased you with at the beginning, the thing that lands like weight. She said the lender would receive formal notice, that the property was held in trust and that Marcus had no authority to encumber it, and further, that any prior assumptions of ownership were incorrect. Then she added, "And Robert, we also need to address the business loan you co-signed. If he's trying to renew or restructure, we can notify the institution that you will not be extending guarantees. We can also formalize your termination of sponsorship related to licensing. That will have an impact, understatement of the year." I said, "Do it." My voice didn't shake. The next step wasn't emotional. It was scheduled. Patricia confirmed calmly that the certified notices would go out Monday morning, and that Franklin County's recording was all ready, complete and public. Part of me wanted to warn Marcus, not to save him, to reduce chaos for Claire, but warning him would give him time to spin, to pressure, to manipulate. I couldn't allow that, not anymore, so I stayed quiet, and I kept making coffee at 5:15. Monday came. Cold, clear, late November light. I went to a job site, walked it like normal, then sat in my truck and watched my phone like it was a fuse. At 9:06 a.m. it rang. It wasn't Marcus. It was Patricia. She said, "He's been notified. He's calling around. He will likely receive a call from the lender's counsel within the hour." I said, "Okay." I drove to Franklin County, courthouse without rushing, parked, turned the engine off, sat. I wanted to be somewhere official, grounded when the truth hit him, not because I wanted to gloat, because I didn't want to be near Claire when the storm started. I didn't understand how much that choice would matter. My phone buzzed at 9:41 a.m. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered, a man's voice, professional. "Mr. Calloway, this is counsel for Meridian First Lending. We have a question regarding the property at Maple Ridge Road and your authority over it." I said, "It's in a trust." There was a pause, paper shuffling on his end. "Yes, we received notice." "Are you the trustee?" "I'm the current trustee," I said. "Understood," he said. "We will be denying the application based on lack of authority by the applicant. Additionally, any representations made by Mr. Marcus," I interrupted gently. "Talk to my attorney." He agreed. He took Patricia's information. He thanked me. Then he said something that sounded almost sympathetic. "This happens more often than you'd think." I hung up. I sat in my truck for a long time. The next call came a few minutes later, and this one was Marcus. I didn't answer. I waited. He called again. Then again. 3 times. That's one of the precise numbers you asked for. 3 calls, back to back, like he could dial his way out of reality. I let it ring, not as punishment, as procedure, because the revelation had to come from the official channels, not from my mouth where he could twist it into a personal fight. At 10:22 a.m. my phone rang again. It wasn't Marcus. It was a voicemail from Patricia. "Robert, lender counsel, contacted Marcus directly. He is aware he has no ownership rights. He is also being advised that your guarantee will not be extended on the business renewal. Call me when you can." I listened twice. Then I did something simple. I walked into the courthouse and sat on a bench near the back, where people wait for their names. People were quiet. Some were on phones. Some stared into space. A woman held a folder to her chest like it was a shield. I didn't belong to any case that day. I just needed to be in a place where consequences are normal. Then Marcus appeared. Not in the courthouse, but in my life through a different doorway. He texted me a single sentence. "What did you do?" No greeting. No respect. No old man this time. Just panic in 4 words. Patricia had warned me that if I responded emotionally, he'd use it. So I did what she coached me to do. I replied with a question. "What did you try to do?" He didn't answer right away. A few minutes later, another text. "Why are you doing this to me?" I stared at it. Because that's the thing. People who think the moment they're stopped is an attack. I typed slowly. "Talk to Patricia Odoms." Then I put my phone down. I waited. A rehook for you, if you're still here. The part that changed everything wasn't the trust itself. It was what Marcus tried next, thinking he could bully the system. I didn't understand what that meant yet. I stood up and walked out of the courthouse. The air was sharp. My breath showed. My hands felt cold, but my mind felt clear. Marcus finally got the full truth through his own channels. That afternoon I heard from Claire, not in a dramatic way. Just a call, quiet. "Dad," she said, voice small. "Marcus is saying the house isn't ours." I closed my eyes for a second. I said, "It's yours to live in. It's protected." Silence. Then she said, "He's upset." I said, "I know." She didn't ask why, not yet. She just said, "I'm tired." I said, "Lay down. I'll come by later if you want." She said, "Okay." When I arrived at Maple Ridge Road that evening, Marcus wasn't there. Claire was on the couch. The kids were doing homework at the table. She looked at me and there was fear there. Not of me, of uncertainty. I sat in the chair across from her and spoke carefully. "I didn't take your home," I said. "I protected it." She swallowed. "From him." I nodded once. "From anyone." And then I told her the truth, in pieces. Not all at once. Not as an accusation. I told her the deed had never been transferred. I told her Marcus had asked for refinancing. I told her I couldn't risk the house being used as a tool. Claire stared at her hands. Then she did something that broke me in a quiet way. She reached over to the coffee table, grabbed a paper towel, folded it, and wrote with a pen that was already there. She slid it toward me without a word. "Thank you, Dad." Same as always. No speeches. And in that moment, Marcus's cold line at Harlow's lost its power. Not because I won. Because Claire saw me. Then Marcus came home later, and here's the thing. There was no shouting. No slammed doors. No confrontation scene. He walked in, saw me, and stopped. He looked at Claire. Then at the kids. He lowered his voice. "Can we talk?" Claire said, "Not in front of them." He nodded. He took a breath. He looked at me, and for the first time his face showed something like humility. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "About the deed. About the trust." I said, "You didn't ask. You assumed." He blinked. His jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. Then he said something human again, smaller than pride. "I was trying to fix things," he said. "I was trying to keep us afloat." I believed he believed that. But fixing things by taking control away from a healing woman isn't fixing. It's ownership. I said, "Then do it the right way." He stared at the floor. He nodded once. That was it. No victory lap. He went upstairs. The kids kept doing homework. Claire leaned back and closed her eyes like she was letting her body settle. Later that week, Claire asked me to come with her to Patricia's office. Not Marcus, me. We sat together while Patricia explained medical power of attorney and financial protections. Claire listened slowly, then signed, naming me as secondary and Dennis as backup if I couldn't serve. Marcus remained primary for normal matters, but now there was structure. Marcus wasn't happy about the implication, but he didn't fight it. I could tell he wanted to. The old instinct. The control reflex. But he saw Claire's face. He saw she wasn't asking permission. She was asking for safety. That's a difference that matters. If you have been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it and drop your thoughts in the comments. Here's the irreversible consequence part. The one people always think is going to be fireworks. It wasn't. It was paperwork. Marcus lost the assumption of ownership. That sounds small until you're the kind of man who lives on assumptions. The house was protected in trust. His refinance was denied. His plan to use the property as collateral died quietly in a lender's database. Then came the business loan renewal. Since I would not extend my guarantee, the terms changed. Interest rate went up, and he couldn't meet the requirements without another guarantor. He had to restructure his business plans, scale back, and take responsibility in his own name. He also lost my contractor license sponsorship. That affected what jobs he could bid and how he could present himself. Again, not dramatic. Just forms filed, approvals updated, doors that quietly no longer opened for him. Those were consequences, not cruelty. In the weeks after, the house felt different. Not perfect, but different. Marcus started looking up when people spoke. Small change, but real. He began taking Claire's recovery seriously, not just managing it. And I watched him with the same steady eye I use on a job site. You can talk about a fix all day, but the beam either holds or it doesn't. There were still tense moments. A marriage doesn't heal overnight because a father files paperwork. But Claire had a safety net now. The kids had stability. And Marcus had boundaries that were written, not argued. Here's a question for you, and I mean it. Do you think protecting your family with paperwork is love, or is it control? Tell me what you think, because I've sat with that one. For me, it was love. Love that doesn't rely on anyone behaving well. Late November turned into deeper cold. The mornings got clearer. Frost started showing up on my windshield like a thin white skin. And one morning, after a courthouse visit to finalize one last filing update Patricia recommended, I sat in my truck in the Franklin County Courthouse parking lot. The air was cold and clear, thin frost on the windshield, the kind that makes the world look outlined. I was alone, hands on the steering wheel, engine off. My phone rang. It was Dennis. I answered. He said, "You okay?" I said, "Yeah." A pause. He said, "Claire." "She's better," I said. "Still healing, but better." Dennis let out a breath like he'd been holding it. He said, "All right then." "That's it," I said. "That's it," he agreed. We didn't celebrate. We didn't talk about Marcus. We didn't talk about the trust like it was a trophy. We just acknowledged the quiet truth. I hung up and sat there, listening to the small ticking sound of the truck cooling down. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like still. Like something that should have ended differently, from the very beginning. Because in my head, family should never have to be protected from family. But sometimes it does. And when it does, you don't become violent. You become careful. You become patient. You make your coffee at 5:15, and you keep your papers in order. You love people in ways that don't ask them to be brave when they're already tired. Loyalty isn't what people say when everything is easy. It's what you do quietly when it costs you something. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. I will see you on the next one.